My name is Sarah. And this is the story of how I learned that the most powerful thing you can ever do is quietly become someone they need. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. Before the dinners. Before the comments. Before I understood what I had walked into. I met my husband James at 24 years old. We were at a work conference. He was presenting a quarterly report for his company and I was there representing mine. He was confident and funny and he had this way of commanding a room without seeming like he was trying to. After the conference ended he found me at the coffee station and said, "I saw you in the front row. You were the only person actually paying attention." I said, "Your slides had too many pie charts." He laughed so hard he spilled his coffee. We talked for 3 hours that evening. He called me the next day. Within 6 months we were inseparable. James came from what I would describe as an established family. His father Richard had built a successful construction company over 30 years. His mother Margaret ran the household and the family's social calendar with military precision. His older sister Victoria was a lawyer. His younger sister Diana was working her way through an architecture degree. They were accomplished. Respected in their community. The kind of family that had a table big enough for 12 people and used it regularly. I came from something quieter. My parents were both teachers. We were comfortable but not wealthy. We lived in a small town 3 hours away. Our family dinners were loud and chaotic and full of laughter and nobody cared what anyone was wearing. I was proud of where I came from. That pride would be tested very quickly. The first time James took me to meet his family I was nervous but genuinely excited. I wore a blue dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. I brought flowers for Margaret and a bottle of good wine that my colleague had recommended. I rehearsed conversation topics in the car. James held my hand as we walked up to the front door. He said, "They are going to love you. Just be yourself." That was the most well-intentioned and ultimately most naive thing he ever said to me. Margaret opened the door. She looked at me from head to toe in one smooth practiced motion that I would come to know very well over the next 7 years. She smiled. She said, "Oh, you're younger than I expected." I said, "It's so lovely to meet you. These are for you." She took the flowers and handed them immediately to someone behind her without looking at them. She said, "Come in. Dinner is almost ready. James didn't mention you were bringing wine. We have a specific one we prefer with this meal." James said, "Mom." She had already walked away. I stood in the doorway of their home and felt the temperature drop. Not from the air conditioning. From something else entirely. Richard shook my hand firmly but said almost nothing to me all evening. Victoria assessed me over her wine glass with the focused attention of someone examining evidence. Diana was the only one who smiled at me genuinely and asked real questions about my life. I clung to Diana that first evening like a life raft. At dinner Margaret asked me about my family. I told her my parents were teachers. She said, "How wonderful. Teaching is such an important, if modest, profession." If modest. 2 words. Delivered with a smile so practiced it was almost invisible as an insult. Almost. I looked at James. He was eating his soup. And I understood in that moment that this was going to be harder than I had thought. I want to walk you through what 7 years of weekly humiliation actually looks like. Because from the outside it can seem small. Each individual comment, each eye roll, each backhanded compliment, taken alone it sounds like nothing. "Oh Sarah, you made this dish? How adventurous of you. That's an interesting dress choice for a formal dinner. James mentioned you went to a state school? Nothing wrong with that of course. You're still at the same company? Margaret's friend's daughter just made partner at her firm. She's about your age actually. Small. Individually small. But 7 years of small things is not small. 7 years of small things is a demolition. Slow. Methodical. Brick by brick. Let me tell you about specific moments. Because the specific moments are what stay with you. My first Christmas with the family. I had spent 2 weeks making a photo album as a gift for Margaret. Printed photos, handwritten captions, organized by year. I had asked James for old family photos and he had helped me put it together. I was proud of it. When Margaret opened it at the gift exchange she looked at it for exactly 4 seconds. She said, "Oh, a photo album. How homemade." Victoria laughed. Margaret set it aside and moved to the next gift. Later that evening I found it on a side table under someone's coat. I put it in my bag when no one was looking. I still have it. Margaret had asked everyone to bring a dish. I spent an entire Saturday making my grandmother's lasagna recipe. The one she had brought from her hometown. The one that took 4 hours and filled the whole house with smell. I carried it in carefully. Margaret looked at it and said, "We usually do traditional Easter foods. Lamb. Spring vegetables. But I'm sure this will be fine for the children's table." The children's table. I was 26 years old. My lasagna sat at the children's table and was eaten by 3 kids under 10 who actually loved it. Small mercies. I had organized a surprise party for James. Reserved a private room at his favorite restaurant. Invited his friends. Planned everything down to the last detail. 3 hours before the party, Margaret called James and told him the family was doing a small dinner for him at the house that evening. She had not mentioned this to me. She had not asked. She simply called and told him. James looked at me apologetically and said, "She didn't know about the party. She just wanted to do something for my birthday." I said, "James the first reserved that room 6 weeks ago. Your friends are already on their way." He said, "I know. But it's my mom. What do I want me to do?" We canceled the restaurant. I called every single friend and explained. We went to the family dinner. Margaret served his favorite cake and smiled at him across the table. She looked at me once during that meal. Just once. And in that look was something I can only describe as satisfaction. By year 4 I had been promoted twice at my company. I was managing a team of 12 people. I was good at my job. I worked hard. I was proud of what I was building. At a Sunday dinner I mentioned a project I had just successfully completed. A big one. Months of work. Margaret listened politely. Then she said, "That sounds very demanding. I always think it's admirable when women manage to balance a career with everything else a marriage requires." James's father always said a home needs someone truly present in it. Someone truly present. Every woman at that table understood exactly what she meant. I looked at James. He said, "Mom makes a good point about work-life balance." That was the night I stopped expecting James to defend me. Victoria got married in year 5. It was a beautiful wedding. Genuinely. I will give them that. I was not in the wedding party despite being part of the family for 5 years. Diana was maid of honor. 3 college friends were bridesmaids. I sat in the family section at the ceremony but was not included in any of the family photos. Not one. When the photographer was arranging the family groupings, Margaret positioned herself between James and Victoria, and the arrangement simply did not include me. James did not say anything. I stood to the side and watched my husband smile in photograph after photograph. Without me. Diana found me afterward near the cocktail hour bar. She put her arm around me. She said quietly, "I'm sorry." I tried to say something. I said, "It's okay." It was not okay. But I had gotten very good at saying it was. Year 6 was when something shifted inside me. Not dramatically. Not with a single moment. Just a quiet internal shift. Like a door closing very softly. I had started therapy in year 5. My therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Reeves, had spent months helping me understand what was happening and more importantly helping me understand my own role in allowing it to continue. She said something in one of our sessions that I wrote down and kept. She said, "Sarah, you have spent 6 years trying to earn the approval of people who have decided not to give it. What would happen if you stopped trying to earn it and started building something that didn't need it?" I thought about that for a long time. And I started to make changes. Quiet ones. I started putting more energy into my career. More energy into friendships I had let fade. More energy into my own goals, my own savings, my own future. I stopped spending weekends preparing elaborate dishes for Sunday dinners where they would be dismissed. I stopped buying thoughtful gifts that would be set aside. I stopped trying to find the magic combination of words and behavior that would finally make Margaret decide I was worthy. I stopped. And in the space that created, I started building. The last Sunday dinner I attended before everything changed was in November of year 7. It was nothing special. That's what I remember most. It wasn't a particularly bad evening. There was no dramatic blow-up. No single terrible comment. It was just another dinner. Margaret made a remark about my haircut. Victoria made a comment about a decision I had made at work that I had mentioned. Richard talked to James for 40 minutes about business without once including me in the conversation. And I sat there. And I looked around that table. And I thought, I am done. Not dramatically. Just done. On the drive home James said, "You were quiet tonight." I said, "Yes." He said, "Is everything okay?" I looked at him. And I said, "James, we need to talk. Not tonight. But soon. We need to have a real conversation about our marriage." He went quiet. And we drove the rest of the way home in silence. That conversation happened 2 weeks later. And it changed everything. I want to be honest about something. James was not a villain. I know that might surprise you given everything I have just told you. But James was not a cruel man. He was not malicious. He was not someone who enjoyed watching me be hurt. He was something in some ways more frustrating than that. He was a man who had grown up in that family system for 30 years and had learned so thoroughly to navigate it by going along that he had completely lost the ability to see it clearly. When I finally laid it all out for him. Not in anger. Not dramatically. Just clearly and specifically. The photo album at Christmas. The children's table. The birthday party. The wedding photos. 7 years of documented specific moments. He listened. And when I finished he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Sarah, I know it hasn't been easy. My family is, they have high standards and they can be difficult. But I think sometimes you take things more personally than." I held up my hand. I said, "James, I am going to stop you there. Because I have heard that sentence or a version of it for 7 years. And I need you to hear me very clearly right now. I am not too sensitive. What has been happening is not normal family friction. It has been consistent and it has been deliberate and it has been happening in front of you. And you have allowed it. Every single time." He opened his mouth. I kept going. I said, "I am not asking you to cut off your family. I am not asking you to choose. I am asking you, for the first time with complete clarity, to decide whether you are my husband first or their son first. Because you cannot be both equally. And for 7 years you have been their son first. And I have been an afterthought at my own dinner table." The room was very quiet. James looked at me for a long time. And then something happened that I had not expected. His eyes filled. He said, "I didn't know you felt this alone." I said, "You weren't looking." He put his face in his hands. And he said, "I'm sorry. Sarah, I am so sorry. I want to be careful here because I don't want to make this sound like one conversation fixed everything. It didn't. What followed was 6 months of couples therapy. Hard conversations. Moments where I wasn't sure we were going to make it. Moments where James had to confront things about his family and his own behavior that were genuinely painful for him to face. But he did face them. That is the difference between James and many of the men in stories like this. When finally confronted with the full unfiltered truth, he chose to face it. He told his mother that Sunday dinners were going to be less frequent. He told Victoria that certain comments about me were not acceptable. He told his father that when I spoke at the dinner table he expected me to be included in the conversation. Margaret did not take this well. She told James he was being controlled. She told him I had poisoned him against his own family. She called me manipulative and cold and ungrateful. James listened to all of it. And then he said, "Mom, she is my wife. And I should have said this years ago. But this ends now." He hung up the phone. He came and found me in the kitchen. He said, "It's done." I looked at him. And for the first time in 7 years, I believed him. While all of this was happening in my personal life, something else was happening professionally. Remember in year 6 when I talked about that quiet internal shift? When I stopped putting energy into earning their approval and started putting it into building something real? Let me tell you what that actually looked like. I had been in financial consulting for 9 years by this point. I was good at it. Very good actually. I had a talent for seeing patterns in numbers that other people missed and for explaining complex financial situations in ways that regular people could understand. For years I had let that talent serve other people's companies. I had made my employers a great deal of money. And I had been compensated well. But not as well as I should have been. In year 6 I started having a different kind of conversation with myself. What if I stopped making other people rich and started building something of my own? I spent 6 months researching, planning, talking to mentors, running numbers obsessively at my kitchen table at midnight. And then in year 7, for months before that final Sunday dinner, I quietly registered a company. Just me. A business license. A name. A plan. I told almost no one. Not because I was hiding it. But because I had learned the value of building in silence. Of not announcing plans until they were real enough to stand on their own. I kept my full-time job. I worked on my company every morning from 5 to 7 before work. Every evening from 8 to 10 after dinner. Every weekend. For 18 months I worked 2 full lives simultaneously. James knew. He was supportive in a way that felt like genuine penance for the years he hadn't been. My friend Alicia knew. She became my first unofficial advisor. Diana knew. She had stayed close to me through everything and she became my most enthusiastic champion. Nobody else knew. Not Margaret. Not Victoria. Not Richard. By the time they found out, it was already too late for them to minimize it. My company was a financial consulting firm. Small at first. Very small. 3 clients in the first 6 months. All small businesses referred by people who knew me personally. But I was good. And good work travels. By month 8 I had 9 clients. By month 14 I had hired my first employee. A young woman named Grace who was brilliant and hungry and reminded me of myself 10 years earlier. By month 18 I had a small office. Real overhead. Real revenue. By year 2 I had a team of 6. By year 3 we had 30 clients and a reputation in the industry that I was genuinely proud of. James watched all of this with a kind of quiet amazement. He said once, "I always knew you were capable of something like this. I just didn't understand the scale of it." I said, "Most people didn't." He heard what I meant. Meanwhile, the relationship with his family had changed dramatically. We still saw them. But on our terms now. Holidays only. Specific boundaries around behavior that James enforced without apology. Margaret had softened slightly. Not dramatically. Margaret was not a woman built for dramatic softening. But she was more careful with her words. Whether that was genuine respect or simply the recalibration of a woman who understood that her son was serious this time, I honestly couldn't tell you. Victoria had actually apologized to me. A real one. Awkward and imperfect but real. She said, I followed Mom's lead for a long time without thinking about whether it was right. I'm sorry. I accepted it. Not because I had forgotten. But because I am not interested in carrying things heavier than they need to be. Richard remained largely the same. Quiet. Formal. Slightly warmer than before but not someone who would ever be comfortable with real emotional honesty. I made my peace with that. Diana had become one of my closest friends. She came to my office for lunch regularly. She sent my company referrals. She cheered every milestone with genuine joy. She was the unexpected gift in all of it. Life was not perfect. But it was mine. Genuinely mine. In a way it had never fully been during those 7 years of Sunday dinners. And then one Thursday morning, my doorbell rang. It was a Thursday morning in October. James had already left for work. I was at my kitchen table with my laptop, coffee beside me, reviewing a client proposal before heading to the office. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door. And standing on my front step, side by side, were Margaret and Richard. I want to pause here and describe this moment carefully because it is one I will remember for the rest of my life. Margaret, who had never once in 7 years come to our home without being invited and scheduled and prepared for like a visiting dignitary, was standing on my doorstep unannounced. She looked different. I had never seen Margaret look uncertain before. Uncertain was not in her vocabulary or her posture or her expression. But she looked uncertain. Richard looked older. Tired in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Margaret said, Sarah. I'm sorry to come without calling. Could we come in? I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I stepped back and let them in. I showed them to the living room. I did not offer coffee immediately. I sat down across from them and I waited. Margaret looked around the room once. Then she looked at me. And she said, I'm going to be direct because I don't know how else to do this. Richard's company is in serious trouble. We've been dealing with some financial difficulties for the past 8 months. We tried to resolve it ourselves but it has gotten to a point where we need outside help. Professional help. I said nothing. She continued. We spoke with our accountant last week and he recommended several consulting firms. One of the names that came up repeatedly as the best in this area of work. She paused. She looked like the words were costing her something significant. Was yours. The room was completely silent. I looked at Margaret. I looked at Richard. And I said, I'm sorry. You're saying my firm came up as a recommendation? Richard spoke for the first time. He said, 3 separate people recommended you. Independently. We didn't know it was your company until we looked it up. I said, and when you found out it was mine? Margaret said, we almost didn't come. At least she was honest about that. I said, but you did come. She said, we need help. Real help. And you are very good. Apparently. Even now. Even on my doorstep asking for help. Apparently. I took a breath. And I thought about 7 years of Sunday dinners. I thought about the photo album under a coat. The children's table. The wedding photos. The birthday party I had cancelled for a dinner I was not told about. I thought about driving home in silence while my husband told me I was too sensitive. And then I thought about something else. I thought about who I was now. Not who I had been at that table. Who I was now. And I made a decision. I said, Margaret. Richard. I appreciate you coming here. I know that was not easy for either of you. They both nodded. I said, I am going to be honest with you. The way I was treated in this family for 7 years was not acceptable. I think somewhere, in the part of you that is capable of honesty, you both know that. Margaret opened her mouth. I held up one hand. Just one hand. And she closed it. I said, I'm not saying this to punish you or to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because if we are going to have any kind of professional relationship, or any kind of real family relationship, it has to start with honesty. Not politeness. Not performance. Honesty. Richard said, that's fair. Margaret said nothing for a moment. Then she said something I had never heard from her in 7 years. She said, you're right. The way I treated you it wasn't kind. I told myself I was protecting James. That I had standards for the people who came into this family. But I think if I'm honest with myself. She stopped. Started again. I think I was afraid of someone I couldn't control. And I handled that badly. Very badly. For a very long time. The room was quiet. Richard put his hand over hers. I looked at them both. Two people who had spent 7 years making me feel small. Sitting in my living room. In my home. Asking for my help. And here's the part that might surprise you. I said yes. Not immediately. Not without conditions. But yes. I took their case. I want to explain why. Because it was not weakness. It was not me being too forgiving or a pushover or going back to who I was. It was a choice made from a position of complete power. I was not the woman at their dinner table anymore. I was the name 3 separate professionals had recommended. I was the woman they had come to. On my doorstep. Hat in hand. I took their case because I am good at my job and because their situation was genuinely solvable and because walking away to prove a point would have said more about my ego than my character. But I took it on my terms. Full professional rate. No family discount. Clear professional boundaries. And one personal condition. I said, Margaret, I need one thing from you. Not as a client. As a family member. I need a real conversation. Not today. When this is resolved. About what happened and what changes going forward. A real one. Can you agree to that? She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, yes, I can agree to that. I nodded. I said, then let's get started. We worked on Richard's company for 4 months. It was complex. The financial situation had several layers and required careful restructuring and some uncomfortable conversations with creditors. But it was solvable. And we solved it. The day I presented the final resolution to Richard, he shook my hand across the conference table. He said, I have been in business for 30 years. I have worked with a lot of people. You are exceptional at what you do. Coming from Richard, that was approximately the equivalent of anyone else bursting into tears of gratitude. I accepted it for exactly what it was. Margaret came to my office once during those 4 months. Not for business. She called ahead. Asked if she could come by. She brought flowers. Real ones. The kind she would have chosen for herself. She sat across from me in my office and she looked at the framed things on my wall. My degrees. A photo of my team. An award from an industry publication. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I had you completely wrong. From the beginning I had you wrong. I saw someone who wasn't what I had planned for James and I decided the story before I knew you at all. I said, I know. She said, I'm sorry. Properly. I'm sorry. I looked at her. This woman who had made 7 years of Sunday dinners into something I had to survive. And I said, I accept that. And I want you to know, I never needed you to think I was good enough for James. I just needed you to try. To actually try to know me. She nodded. Her eyes were bright. Margaret, I would bet everything I own, did not cry in public. But she was close. She said, I'd like to try now. If it's not too late. I said, it's not too late. And I meant it. That was 2 years ago. I want to tell you where things stand now. Because real life is not a movie and real resolution is messier and more gradual and more human than a clean ending. Richard's company is stable. He has implemented the systems we put in place and he checks in with my firm quarterly now. As a paying client. At full rate. Margaret and I have lunch every 6 weeks or so. It is not effortless. There are still moments where her old habits surface. A comment that lands slightly wrong. A tone that carries old echoes. But she catches herself now. Sometimes she even apologizes in the moment. That is not nothing. That is actually everything. Victoria and I are cordial. Genuinely cordial. Not close. But respectful in a way that feels real rather than performed. Diana is one of my best friends and I don't think that will ever change. And James. James is my husband. Not a perfect one. No one is. But a man who made a choice when it mattered. A man who went to therapy and did the work and held the line with his family even when it was hard and uncomfortable and cost him something. I think that matters. I think choosing to be better when you finally understand you've been wrong is one of the hardest things a person can do. And he did it. My company now has 42 employees. We were recognized last year as one of the top consulting firms in our region. I spoke at a conference last spring in front of 400 people in my industry. I called my mom afterward. She cried. My dad said, that's my girl. And I thought about second-grade teachers and state schools and modest professions. And I smiled. Because the woman who made those comments was sitting in my living room 2 years ago asking for my help. And I gave it to her. Not because I owed her anything. But because I had become someone who could afford to be generous. Someone who didn't need the satisfaction of watching people suffer. Someone who was too busy building to spend time burning things down. That is the real revenge, I think. Not the moment they knocked on the door. But who I was when I opened it. If you have been sitting at a table where you are not valued. If you have been swallowing your dignity with every meal at someone else's idea of a family dinner. If you have been told you are too sensitive, too emotional, too much, not enough. I want to say this directly to you. Stop trying to earn a seat at a table that was never built for you. Go build your own table. Make it big enough for people who actually see you. And when the people who dismissed you finally come knocking, you get to decide what to do with that moment. Not from a place of anger. From a place of power. Real power. The kind that is built quietly over years of showing up for yourself when no one else did. My name is Sarah. I sat at their table for 7 years. Now they sit at mine. And there is always room for people who are willing to do better. That is the story I wanted to tell you today. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt familiar, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you believe that the best revenge is a life well built, subscribe, hit the bell, come back next week. Because there are more stories. And every single one of them is worth hearing. See you then.